It is August 15th in the year of our Lord 2025, and this is Lunduke's Week in Tech. I am today joyfully resurrecting two traditions of the Lunduke Journal that have sat languishing in obscurity for far too long. One of which is this: my weekly roundup where I am not beholden to any particular topic, but simply get to look back at the week that was and pontificate on what we have just witnessed in tech history. And the other thing that I brought back today is the regular weekly funny programming pictures article. This one may not matter to a lot of you, but it matters a great deal to me. I have been doing these for a while now, and I named them all in Roman numerals. The current funny programming pictures article is part LXVIII. I will leave that as a exercise to the reader to deduce what number that actually is. And I'd call it programming pictures, funny programming pictures, because I do not generally like the word memes. I find the word memes a bit annoying, so I call them funny pictures, which is what they generally are. And this week, pretty much all of the funny pictures that I included are simply making fun of Rust because it's fun. I'm just being very clear about this. Rust is a perfectly fine programming language, but it is so much fun to make fun of Rust, in large part because whenever you do, all of the Rust evangelists in the world, they freak out and they just start losing their noggins, and it's just too gosh darn enjoyable. So there's a whole bunch of pictures of me making fun of Rust. All right, but let's talk about this week in tech, because that's what we're here to do. I posted this article here earlier, and I'm going to read a little bit to you now, and then I've just got a whole lot of other thoughts I want to include here. It has been another wild week in the world of computing, and of course, a number of news stories got ignored almost completely by those Brand X tech journalists. But never fear, Lunduke's got you covered. Below are the top stories which the other tech news outlets are trying to ignore, impacting open source and tech in general for the last week. All right, I've kind of lumped these into two categories. One is the absolute chaos that's happening in the Linux kernel, and the other is the non-woke software list. There's some other stories as well, but those I felt like were the two biggest things that I really wanted to kind of look back on and talk about a little bit more here at the end of the week. A couple of quick notes. Because we've had a couple of little changes and shakeups at the Lunduke Journal, I want to make a few things clear. The first, all of the articles that I'm about to talk about and all of the audio podcasts are free for everybody, whether you're subscribers or non-subscribers, it doesn't matter. You can go to, where's this at? You can go to lunduke.com, and there's a whole bunch of links there where you can get the RSS feeds and on Substack, on YouTube, on X, on everything is there for both the articles, the podcasts, and the videos. It should be pointed out that the videos, which are video versions of the audio podcast, are only available to subscribers to the Lunduke Journal. They're the people who make it possible to do all of these shows. We don't take any money from any company ever for sponsorships or advertisements, not ever. And the reason, I think, should be crystal clear to absolutely everyone. The moment the Lunduke Journal takes money from a company, we are at least somewhat beholden to them. Especially if we're taking money from a tech company, but really any company, the more money we take from those companies and the more companies we take money from, the less free the Lunduke Journal is to talk about and say whatever the Lunduke Journal wants, to follow every story to wherever that story leads. So it is absolutely imperative that the Lunduke Journal never run ads. Not ever, not even a little bit. Not on YouTube, not anywhere else. No ad revenue. It cannot happen. And so what we've done is we've taken all of the videos and made them exclusively for subscribers. The one exception is what you're listening to or watching right now. The Lunduke's Week in Tech is free for everybody. But if you want all of the individual shows, all of the ones that come out throughout the week, those are all subscriber exclusives. And I want to point this out because this is cool. This is cool. As of this morning, I did a quick count. The Lunduke Journal has, since January 1st of 2025 of this year, published 216 episodes. And all of those episodes are released as both video and audio podcasts. They're the same shows. One has video and one is just audio. 216. And there's only been 220-something days in the year so far. That means there is a Lunduke Journal episode for almost every single day of the year since January 1st. Compare that to last year, 2024, when I pumped out 226 shows, which is still an awful lot of shows. But that means that the Lunduke Journal is set to pass the previous year in terms of total shows sometime in the next 2 weeks, 10 days, 12 days, something like that. Pretty crazy. And we're going to go well over 300 shows this year. We might get close to 365 shows by the end of the year. Oh, and one other stat, because it was pretty awesome. Over the last week alone, in just the last 7 days, the stories from the Lunduke Journal, just the articles and audio podcasts alone, were read or listened to roughly 5.5 million times. That's awesome. That's awesome. I seriously, a huge thank you to everyone who makes this all possible, because that is awesome. That is awesome. 5.5 million times this last week. Whew. Last week was a good week. Most weeks are not 5.5 million reads and listens weeks. I mean, we do good every week. Don't get me wrong, but 5.5 million was, whoa, that was a bit of a bump. That was a bit of a bump. We'll see how next week goes. But quite good. Very happy with that. Now I'm going to link to my Week in Tech article here wherever you're getting this show, so you can click on all the links and follow them. The links to all the articles and the podcast episodes and the videos inside this particular article all link to Substack. However, that is just because the Lunduke Journal publishes on so many platforms. If I were to link to all of them, it would just be a nonstop list of links for this article, and it would just be annoying to look at and annoying. I would get carpal tunnel from copying and pasting it all. So if you don't use Substack to get the shows, if you want to watch them on X or Locals or use the podcast feed or whatever, go to lunduke.com and find the link there for where you want to grab it. If you want to download the MP4s over on Itch, wherever you want to grab it, it's up at lunduke.com. Nice and easy. All right. So let's talk about the chaos of the Linux kernel here, because holy heavens, things went nuts. Things were crazy in the world of Linux kernel development this week. And no, the word crazy doesn't quite do justice to the absolute chaos and insanity taking place around the kernel. We kicked off the week by learning that layoffs from Intel had caused a number of significant Linux kernel modules to become orphans, meaning nobody was left to maintain them. Right? No one loved them anymore. They were orphans. Their parents are dead. And we realized, after taking a really hard look at it, that the number of orphaned kernel modules in the Linux kernel has actually doubled in the last 2 years. Doubled, I say. And again, you go check out the article on this one. It's crazy. These numbers shot through the roof in just the last 2 years, almost doubled. It's something like, was it 8 point something % of all Linux kernel modules don't really have an active maintainer anymore? And we're not talking about like random unknown, like one version of an obsolete, never released Wacom tablet, its driver. No. We're talking about things like temperature CPU sensors, or ACPI support, and all manner of stuff. A ton of stuff has gotten orphaned over the last 2 years. And it's gotten orphaned from a number of different events. One of the things that really just dumbfounded me is how it seems like the Linux kernel development world is on a freight train, a speed train barreling towards nobody maintaining like half of the kernel modules. What happens at that point? I mean, really, what happens at that point when it's just one thing after another? Last year, they banned all Russian developers, and I get it. That was based on an executive order from President Biden, which made it so that no company could work with, even an open source, Russian programmers or programmers working for Russian companies or programmers currently living in Russia, or I think who's like second cousin is Russian. Like it was really broad reaching. And so the Linux Foundation had no choice. They had to comply with this. And the way it was written was very, very specific. In fact, it's really amazing the open source projects that in the United States that haven't complied with it. Like the GNOME Foundation, for example, is based in the United States and has not complied with that executive order, which, as far as I can tell, is still standing. So I don't know what that means. But from the Linux point of view, that was just one additional thing that caused yet more kernel modules to be completely abandoned. File system drivers, device drivers, core system components. It's crazy. And now these Intel layoffs, we've already lost kernel module maintainers, and the layoffs aren't even complete yet. We've got a huge number of Linux developers that are working at Intel that will be finalizing their layoffs, finishing up their work and wrapping it up over the rest of the calendar year. I think the next month and a half, 2 months, something like that. It's crazy. What impact this is going to have, I don't know, but it's not a great one. And the part that concerns me is that there are very few instances where new developers are coming in to take over maintenance, whether it be paid developers or volunteer developers. There have been a few. There have been a few that became orphaned and then got a new maintainer, but not very many. Not as many as you would think. So what happens as this continues on? As we see layoffs continue, as we see maybe more instability or sanctions with governments, are we going to see more kernel modules become orphaned? Probably. Probably. So, but then, after we reported on all of that, I don't know if you saw this, but Linus Torvalds laid into a Google engineer for writing what he called garbage code that, quote, makes the world actively a worse place to live. Let's see, I think he even told the code to specifically get bent. Now, I bring that up. One, because it's funny. It's entertaining watching Linus just tear into people. He does this every couple of months. He gives someone a real what for. And sometimes it's filled with expletives. Sometimes it is off the charts rude. He just starts swearing at people. And you know what? Almost every time it gives me a chuckle. I mean, how much of a badge of honor is it to be just royally chewed out by Linus Torvalds, right? I mean, that's something where you get that email where Linus is telling you that your code made the world a worse place to live and it was garbage. You print that out and frame it. You know what I mean? I mean, to get torn into by Linus, that's fantastic. Now, hopefully that guy didn't get into a bunch of trouble at his job at Google because of that. But I'm sure his coworkers will never let him forget it. Nor should they. It's too good. It's too entertaining. But besides being really entertaining, the reason I bring up Linus just tearing into people regularly for years, so much so that it's almost become a tradition, is because of the Bcash story. So for those of you who have been following this, the Lunduke Journal's reported on one or two instances of this over the last year or so. But Bcash is a file system that is developed by a guy named Kent Overstreet. It's a great name, by the way. Now, the Linux kernel leadership does not like this guy. They just don't like him, right? Something about him rubs them wrong. And last October, I believe, they did a temporary ban, like a 1-month ban of this developer, where they said you cannot submit code patches to the Linux kernel, including for his file system, Bcash, because of code of conduct violations. And I covered this at the time, and the code of conduct violations were absolutely bizarre. It was basically he was a little bit rude and refused to publish a properly written apology for being a bit rude. And to be fair, when you look back through this Kent Overstreet developer, I don't know the guy, but when you look back through his emails, yeah, he comes off as pretty abrasive and rude, right? Nowhere near as abrasive and rude as Linus himself. Nowhere near. Like, if Linus is a 10 of being abrasive and rude, this Kent Overstreet guy, this Bcash developer, I would put him at like a 6, right? He's pretty abrasive. He's pretty rude. He's pretty blunt, but not crazy so. Well, now they're talking about banning him completely. Not just that, but actually removing the Bcash file system from the Linux kernel entirely. So what they're really saying is they dislike this one developer so much that they not only don't want to work with him anymore, but they want to remove the code he has submitted and make all of the people who rely on his file system suffer for it. That's crazy to me. That's crazy that they would go that far. And last I saw, they hadn't come down with a final decision yet, but according to private emails from Linus and statements from some other, high-up Linux kernel developers, that clearly seems like what they're going to do, right? Crazy that they would do that. What's bonkers to me about that is not just that they're basically looking at tossing out an entire piece of functionality because a developer is rude and Linus is way more rude. That's already crazy. But that one of the other reasons that they were talking about getting rid of this guy is that he occasionally submitted code patches too late in a cycle, which is weird, which is truly bizarre, because if you follow Linux kernel development at all, you know that every single Linux release cycle for every version of Linux kernel, there are people submitting patches very late. And if you banned people for submitting patches to the Linux kernel late, you would no longer have any developers, including Linus himself, in the Linux kernel. Because, yeah, he submits patches late. That's crazy. Oh, but with the craziest thing, though, the craziest thing. Do you remember Riser FS? Riser FS was developed by a guy who literally killed his wife, got convicted to it, and is currently in jail. They have only recently removed Riser FS from the Linux kernel. Like now, like in the last weeks, the last bits of Riser FS are being removed from the Linux kernel. And that guy years ago was a murderer, and they left his code in. So the Linux kernel's official stance on removing code because of social faux pas is if you're a murderer, your code stays. But if you are 60% as abrasive as Linus himself, you're out. The entire code goes out with you. That's nuts to me. Well, the Linux Foundation. Did they fix any of this? No. Did they come in and try to smooth things over or use some of their huge stockpile of money because they bring in $250 million a year? Did you know that? Did you know that the Linux Foundation brings in over $250 million every year? You might ask yourself, what the heck do they do with that? Good question. Well, they certainly didn't use it to pay for people to become maintainers of all those orphaned kernel modules, or to find some way to smooth over all the issues that we've just talked about. No. They paid for an update to an approved language list, which officially banned the word hung from everything Linux Foundation related. And they're advocating for all open source developers and testers and documentarians to no longer use the word hung, H-U-N-G, hung. Because if you use the word hung, that is literally violence, maybe even genocide. They added that to the list of all the other words, you can't use master slave anymore, for your master branch or master slave drives or any of those sorts of things, right? You can't, there's just so many, you can't use the word grandfathered in, it's absolutely ridiculous the number of words and phrases that they say you're not allowed to use. But when I saw that they added the word hung, I couldn't stop laughing for like a good solid 3 minutes. Because, oh my heavens, the Linux Foundation doth ban hung. And here's the crazy part. We just listed out a whole bunch of pure insanity, just nutsoidness about the Linux kernel. And all of that just happened this week or culminated this week. What does next week have in store? Oh my gosh. Oh, so speaking of next week, let me see. Do I have this here? No, that's not it. Clicking on things until I find it. There it is. We are in an awaiting game right now for you guys on the United States of America, the Department of Justice v. Google. Many of you will remember this. This is the lawsuit that the Department of Justice and multiple states and whatnot brought against Google, specifically around their monopoly in the search market. There's multiple lawsuits going on with Google right now. But this one has essentially completed. Google was found guilty of doing very naughty things with their monopoly position in the search market. And the court ruled that one of those very naughty things was that they paid browser makers a significant amount of money to keep Google as the default search engine and not have other default search engines. Right? And in fact, that money is what funds Mozilla. almost entirely, over 80% of Mozilla's revenue, and they make hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars every year, comes from Google saying, hey, in Firefox, make the default search engine Google. So what happens now, because the judge has already ruled in this case, Google is guilty. Okay, great. But what does that mean? Well, it means that right now we are at the very, very end of the remedy phase. So anytime now, sometime during the month of August, the judge in this case will be handing down his final ruling, his verdict on the remedy. The Department of Justice had a proposed remedy. Google countered with their proposed remedy, and then they had a whole series of trials around it back in April around the remedy. And one of the core things that keeps coming up again and again is Google no longer being allowed to pay companies to make Google the default search engine. Which means if that gets upheld, because that's what the DOJ is seeking, and that appears based on every court document I've been able to read, and I've read everything available publicly, everything. It appears that the judge kind of seems to be siding a bit with that. If that gets upheld, that means that Mozilla will no longer have 80% of their revenue, potentially very quickly. Now, what we know in terms of timing is that the final ruling is scheduled to be handled down in August. Does that mean it will? No. It could come down late. It could come down in September. We don't know. But it's scheduled for August. And I was looking through the court records of this. I've got some of them up on the screen right now for those of you watching the video version. I also posted this over on X if you want to go check that out. But I was looking through the court records, and there have been a number of filings over the last two and a half weeks. Some of them were pretty simple things. Changes of legal counsel. That's not unusual when you have these long, protracted legal battles that go on for several years with changing governments and all sorts of things. A lot of times you'll get these notice of withdrawal of appearances, basically meaning that certain attorneys are no longer involved in various representatives of either the defendant or the plaintiff, and those sorts of things change. So those are pretty regular, especially this late in the game. A lot of these attorneys simply that were on it before, have other things to do now, and so they've swapped out attorneys. That sort of thing happens. But one of the other things that came in was that the judge asked Google. Let me see if I've got this exact thing here. The judge asked Google for a clarification, essentially, to clarify a lot of the things that Google had been talking about why it had 1-year term limitations for OEMs and carrier agreements, when they didn't have 1-year limitations for browser agreements, and why, the judge was clearly scrutinizing a lot of Google's statements. And so Google on August 1st filed a series of, filed one main couple of page long clarification of all that, which read kind of funky. And so that's all going on right now. So it's clear that at least as of August 1st, there were still some things up in the air, right? Clearly, at that point, the judge in the case had not made up 100% of his mind because he was still asking Google for clarifications on things. And it kind of read to me a little chastising, like he was not too happy with Google. Now, whatever happens, this ruling could come down as I'm recording this. It could come down next Monday. It could come down a few weeks from now. We don't know. I'm going to keep on top of it every day until it does. But once it hits, what happens next is going to be really fascinating. Because what happens next is anybody's guess. I mean, right now we assume that Google will appeal the ruling entirely. And then Google will seek to stay any ruled penalties, any remedies that were officially handed down pending the appeal. And all of that is up for the judges to decide, and we'll see what happens at that point. So that means that Mozilla could get a kind of a stay of execution for a few months, a year, maybe none at all. We're going to find out. We're going to find out pretty soon. But anyway, I wanted to let you know that I'm keeping tabs on that because it's really fascinating. It's going to have a huge impact on the browser market, on the world of open source desktops. A lot of things are going to be impacted with that one. All right, let's talk about the non-woke software list. So, the quantity and quality of non-woke software has been continuing to grow. So I put out the August edition of Lunduke's non-woke software list, which had a few noteworthy new additions. And again, it's just like everything else, that's available as an article, an audio podcast, both of those free for everybody to grab, and then the video for subscribers. And a big takeaway, though, and I won't go through all the details of that right now. Go check it out for yourself. It's all there and free. But the takeaway, the kind of the high level here, is that now we have multiple operating system options with display servers, desktop environments, development tools, and web browsers, all of which are decidedly non-woke. In other words, to put it another way, it is now possible to piece together the majority of a computing environment in a way that is both open source and free software and very much non-woke. And this is a really important part of all this. A really important part is all of this is of exceptionally high quality. Because if the software is all garbage, it doesn't matter that it's non-woke. I don't want to use garbage software. I'm going to use good stuff, right? But the only stuff I've included in the non-woke software list is stuff that I've personally vetted. I've spent some time looking into, and I can say with a certain level of authority that this is quality. There is real good value here that has nothing to do with wokeness or non-wokeness. It's just good quality software. For example, Ex Libre. Ex Libre being the non-woke fork of the woke Xorg, right? Okay, so one is woke, one is non-woke, and if they're the same, I know which one I'm choosing. I'm going to choose the one that's non-woke. However, if you mask and obscure all the politics of both of those projects, I would still choose Ex Libre because of the massive amount of work that's gone into it. More new features and more bug fixes, like old bug fixes that should have been fixed 5-10 years ago in Xorg, have been applied to Ex Libre, then have occurred within Xorg in the last decade. We're only like 2 or 3 months into this project. It's exploding. It's amazing. And we're seeing a lot of this sort of thing happen. Multiple Linux distributions, BSD offerings, all of it, just really good quality stuff here. I love it. I love that we're at that point now where you can say if it's important to you, and it doesn't have to be, but if it's important to you to use software where the people don't just hate you and want to actively discriminate against you for being a normal person, right? If you don't want to use that kind of woke software, you don't have to, right? At least not for the most part. You can use pretty significant offerings on your system that are very non-woke. Now, if you want to use if you're using an open source desktop operating system, I mean, there's so many thousands of components in there by so many developers. Yeah, some of them are still going to be woke. But I mean, once you got to the point where you've got your desktop environments or your display servers, plus the full distributions and repositories entirely, plus some dev tools, oh my gosh, your browser, most software you interact with then at every day, all day long, is going to be non-woke if you want it to be. That's really neat. I mean, that's neat. That's really cool that we're at that point. And I've actually got a fairly long list of software that have been contacting me over the last few weeks saying, hey, Lunduke, you know what? We're non-woke too. Or, hey, I don't think this piece of software is woke. So I've got a lot to go through because at this point, I'm trying to only highlight and showcase things that are of a verified quality. So I'm really taking my time with it. If you've sent me some suggestions, by the way, and I haven't featured them in a new non-woke list or just talked about them in an article, don't take it personally. I've just got a lot to go through. There's a ton of them, and I want to personally install and kick the tires and really investigate these pieces of software before I start to go out there and recommend it to people. Right? I really want to take that seriously. So I'm going through them real slowly, bit by bit, but I've got a lot more. Expect more new pieces of software added next month when we put out the next non-woke software list. So there were some other really cool stories this week that didn't make the top ones to talk about. NixOS celebrating Pride Month year round. That was crazy. The T-App clone that exposed driver's license. That was nuts. Remember the T-App, that application for women to talk bad about men? They called it the T-App. Well, they had like no security at all, and so like 60 gigs of driver's license photos and all sorts of things were exposed. A clone of the T-App called T for Her, which was like, or T for Him, something like that. Anyway, they put out an app that was the same thing, but for guys that talk bad about girls. Same basic problems. It was super easy for another tech journalist, I think it was over at TechCrunch. They did good work on this one, to investigate, and they found it was really easy to find the driver's licenses for users. That's crazy. There's so many crazy things about that. I wrote that article up, and it's out there. Go grab that one. Let's see what else we got. Oh yeah, Android 16 has GPU accelerated Linux graphical software coming to it. That's really fun and neat. I love the idea of that, and I'm oh man. I might almost need to find a way to convince my wife to let me buy a new Pixel tablet when Android 16 comes out, just so that I can try using an Android Google Pixel tablet running Android 16 to run Linux software as sort of like a mini Linux laptop. I might almost need to do that. That just sounds fun. And of course, the funny programming pictures. So go check out the funny programming pictures. And why do we have the funny programming pictures? Because we need to laugh. Because, oh my gosh, I need this for my soul. I need, every week, there are so many intense stories of people doing crazy stupid things, crazy woke things, organizations using their money in psycho ways, problems with major open source foundations. Like, there's so many stories that are like a bummer. I just need to be able to laugh. I need a good giggle out of the whole gosh darn thing, and so that's why I put the funny programming pictures lists together. It's just 10 to 15 or so of my favorite of the funny programming pictures, call them memes, whatever you want to call them, together in one list. And so yeah, it's more of a palate cleanser at the end of the week than anything else. Thank you again to all the Lunduke Journal subscribers. If you want to subscribe and be able to watch all of the videos that get released all week long, some of which we talked about a little bit here today, go to lunduke.com and you can see a thing where it says where to watch. Subscription required. And there's Locals, X, Patreon, YouTube, Substack, and then there's MP4 downloads, which are via itch, which is a really cool thing because you can just download the MP4 files and watch the shows however you want. And through the end of August, all subscriptions through itch, Substack, and Locals are 50% off, or Bitcoin. All of those are 50% off. That includes monthly, yearly, and lifetime subscriptions. So go to lunduke.com and there's just scroll down on the right-hand side. There's a little 50% off Lunduke subscriptions link. Click it, and it's got all the details there. It's really, really, really simple. In fact, it means that if you grab a monthly subscription, it's only $3. If you grab it through Substack, or Locals. And if you grab a yearly subscription, that monthly price, I think, comes down to $2.25, something like that. Or you can get a lifetime subscription for $100, which is crazy because that's for life. Assuming that you intend on being a nerd for more than the next 2 years, the value of a lifetime subscription is bonkers good. I mean, essentially, the longer you are a nerd, the better deal a lifetime subscription is. I'm not a huge fan of having too many monthly subscriptions, right? So for me, I like the ability of having a yearly subscription or a lifetime subscription because then I don't have to think about it every single month. I mean, okay, so $5, $3, whatever. That's not a huge amount. Even if I subscribe to 10 shows, right, for $3 a month, well, it's just $30. It's really not that much. It's more of having to do it every month or having to remember it every month. I'm like, that's a pain. I like it. I like the idea of doing it yearly, right? Just remember it once a year. I just subscribe once a year. It's a little less often. I don't feel like I'm just getting charged $3 all the time, right? I just pay once and I get a full year of stuff. So that's how I like to do things. And I love the idea of being able to get a lifetime subscription to independent media, like to say, I want to support this publication, this podcaster, this YouTuber, this whoever, and say, I just want to plop down $50, $100, $200, $300, whatever. Here's some bucks. And I really want to support the work you do. And I want to be a part of whatever this is forever, because this is great. I like that. I wish there was more of that. I would personally do a whole lot more of that. I've seen this happen a bit in the gaming industry, where a massively multiplayer game will be in development and they'll put out a lifetime subscription option, during the very first days, for the early subscribers, right? And they'll say, okay, look, we don't know how long we'll be around, but we intend to be around for the next, 10 years. So if you want a lifetime subscription, here's how much it costs. And it's the cost of 2.5 years worth or something like that. So you get to come in and boom, pay it once, and you don't have to think about it again as long as that company is running their servers and you can keep playing that game. I like that. I like that. I've always liked that. Now, at some point, and I've toyed with this in the past, I'll probably have to pull the lifetime subscription option off, and say, okay, no more lifetime subscriptions. I've toyed with that around a couple of times now, but for the time being, I'm leaving it there. And by the way, when I do that, if I ever do that, all lifetime subscriptions will be honored for life because that's how lifetime works. For the time being, I'm just leaving it there because I like it so much. I don't know that it's necessarily the best business decision for me to have lifetime subscriptions at such a cheap price. I mean, offering 50% off an already cheap lifetime subscription is not the greatest long-term business strategy, but I like it. I wish I had that option for some of the I hate to use the word content creators, but you know what I mean? Some of the writers and video producers and musicians that I really love. I wish I could do that so I could invest in them. I love that option. Anyway, that's all up at lunduke.com. Click on it. Click on the 50% off link and grab some. And then you can enjoy all the videos as well as the articles and audio podcasts, which are already free for the whole gosh darn world anyway. There we are. There we are. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I truly appreciate it. And I love that we're getting back to doing these weekly roundup shows. There's always some extra thoughts to talk about, and it's nice to be able to look back on the week. So often, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there's just so many news items hitting. I mean, you see that with the Lunduke Journal shows. I mean, we're putting out a show almost every day and a constant onslaught of articles. There's just so much news that it's nice to be able to, at the end of the week, put out a whole page full of funny pictures, laugh for a little bit, and then look back at the news and say, okay, what's the takeaway here? What's the trends? What's the bigger picture? What do I have to look forward to in the week ahead? What am I worried about? And think about all of that. And I appreciate you coming along for the ride with all of it. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes, across this vast and glorious inner tube of ours, I do declare, end broadcast.